Welcome everybody, and thank you all for coming to this inaugural State of the Relationship report. Before I start, I want to do the unforgivable and single out one person without whom this document would not exist, and a process that almost drove her to despair. Rosa, stand up. That's Rosa Fernandez. She is a remarkable woman, let me tell you. So what the plan today is that I will present, because I said with the CEO, someone does the work, you take the credit, right? So I will present the State of the Relationship report, the highlights. Then we'll have David Sweeny from the Higher Education Funding Council for England, who's in part responsible with Alan Langlands and others in HEFCE for the existence of the National Centre for University and Business. Then Alan Hughes, who's one of the global experts on innovation, will speak, and at whose feet I have spent 3 years now. I hope some of it's rubbing off. There will be a panel discussion on talent in particular, about young graduate talent. And then we're going to go out to you guys for a discussion around 4 questions which we'll give you. And if you could spend some time thinking about those questions and then feeding back, that would be fantastic. And then afterwards, there's a drink. Unfortunately, the drink's important, but unfortunately, you're not going to have to watch a film of our annual review. It's very generous. So the State of the Relationship, this was established at the request of the Higher Education Funding Council for England, but now is extended across all of the other funding councils and the research councils of the Technology Strategy Board. The specifics of the request were it had to be based on evidence, thank goodness. It had to have joint views of higher education and business. Had to be aimed at developing the partnership and providing evidence of how that partnership could develop. And then we were requested to burst some persistent myths. So that's the agenda. In future, and Alan Hughes will talk about this later, we want to see if we can develop some what Alan calls trajectory measures. How can you see the system getting better over time? So we're going to have a review group looking at what kind of indices might produce that. But in our first year, quite frankly, we didn't have the time or the resource to do it. So what we've done instead is we commissioned 35 collaboration case studies, which are dotted throughout the report. We commissioned expert reviews of existing data and evidence. And then we asked for insights from successful practitioners. Again, all of these you'll find in the report. The areas that we looked at, we'll look at how you connect innovators. We're really driving hard at the small company agenda. We asked some policy experts to look at the policies around collaboration. I'm particularly obsessed by the role of intermediaries between universities and businesses. We know that the Funding Council spent a long time and a lot of money building capacity in universities, and we wanted to review how that was going. We're also looking at how the partnerships and pathways, career pathways work. I was very struck by the Sport England website, where they talk about talent pathways, and the idea that you pick up somebody young and then you develop their talent over time, I think is a very exciting idea and a good way of thinking about all this. We're again trying to get at this thing about just because you study English doesn't mean you go into an arts job. Just because you study science doesn't mean you don't go into an arts job. We're very keen to look at this career portfolio area, because actually that's preparing real graduates for the real future of the economy. And then finally, we know that universities are anchored to local need. I just came down from Teesside last week, and if the university wasn't there, it would be tumbleweed in the economy. And I can say that for other universities in our system. But equally, I keep saying to people, don't forget that Oxford and Cambridge anchor Oxfordshire and Cambridge. You know, that those clusters of businesses that are built around our great universities are important as well. This is me sitting at the feet of Alan Hughes when we developed a project called Growing, which is now going to be a book coming out quite soon, called Growing Value. It's based on a task force called Enhancing Value, led by David Eiton, who's the Group Head of Research and Technology at BP, and by Shirley Pearce, who was then at Loughborough. We said you've got to think about everything in a systemic way. It's not about picking off individual bits. And initially we looked at the so-called golden triangle of government, business and universities, and we thought, actually, do you know what, that's not taking into account the financial markets, which, you can't build a successful economy without fully functioning financial markets, and we can't build successful innovation without fully functioning labour markets. So we think that the system looks like a pentagonal, and we'll try to reflect that in the report. And Alan will talk more about this later. But if you actually look at the percentage of businesses talking about how they engage with universities, it's all over the place. It's everything from training, consultancy. It's not all about IP, and it's not all about just recruiting graduates. There's a multiplicity of relationships between businesses and universities, and Alan has been absolutely brilliant at championing that model of engagement. Well, what did we find when we did it? Well, the UK is good at collaboration between businesses and universities. Externally, we're validated by the Global Innovation Index, where it ranks as third and sixth for business university collaboration in the World Economic Forum survey. Now, six, you want to be first, right? So we'll be looking at how what's underlying those numbers and trying to figure out how we drive forward to be more success. I think that organic collaboration is the stories that you'll see consistently in the report. Is we did it because we wanted to engage with the university, because it was important to us, and we're doing this without public funding. But obviously, public funding has to build on organic collaboration, understand organic collaboration to get the best out of business-university partnerships. We also know that businesses engage for a multiplicity of reasons. As Alan's slide showed, that there's dozens of reasons to engage with the university. It's not just about innovation, but the graduate talent is the key to success. The founder of Intel said the most important thing that Stanford did for Silicon Valley was the production of successful graduate talent. So we're going to never forget that actually it's graduates that will drive innovation. Local need came up time and time again. Again, this anchoring role of universities, and it's one of the most important areas for pulling forward successful collaboration. And although specific collaborations need facilities, and that does come up, and they need access to equipment, and that does come up, time and again, it's the high quality research base that people talk about. We are here because the best researchers in the world are here, is what we get back a lot in the case studies. However, there are barriers. A particular barrier remains information. A lot of small companies simply don't know enough about universities. They're frightened of them. And despite all your collective best efforts, they remain frightened of them and confused. So it's something we need to think about. Successful intermediaries, everything from the TSB all the way out to actually commercial intermediaries are deeply engaged, but they need to engage more, and we need to join the system up. But it is broadly complementary to business university engagement. And then well-managed knowledge exchange drives success. There's a brilliant piece of work in analysis in the report showing that small universities are as successful as big universities in driving knowledge exchange, but actually it has to be actively managed knowledge exchange. So you have to actively balance consultancy, contract research, CPD, and the use of facilities and development. It's not what we discovered, Rosa actually discovered, that it's not a static model. The people who are more actively engaged will get more successful. On the myth busting, there's no simple way to map demand on supply. You can't just add up all the jobs in the economy and all the graduates in the economy and put one next to the other and say we've got a shortage of 50,000 somethings, because actually all graduates go off and do all sorts of things, which is great. So as we see in here, English graduates go into healthcare, and engineering graduates go into creative companies. And Anne Morrison's here, and from the BBC, and Anne and I often talk about what the engineer of the future in the BBC looks like, and this sounds more like a producer than a classic engineer. So we're saying judge the system and the success of collaboration by the portfolio of jobs that graduates do, not by their first jobs. Now this is a controversial statement, and I keep saying it, and I will keep carrying on saying it because actually you can go and talk to the top HR departments in big companies, and they'll say this. Businesses don't want oven-ready graduates. They want people who've got good critical facilities, good team playing abilities, and so on and so forth. We said this at the engineering deans session last week. Actually, a very good presentation from UCL. But one of the businesses stood up and said, you know what, we do want oven-ready graduates. We just want a bunch of engineers who can do one thing. So although I'm quite happy to keep banging on about this, because I quite fundamentally believe it, I think we also have to accept that small companies need quite specific forms of specialisms. And we shouldn't, those of us who believe in this shouldn't lose sight of that. And then internationalism is good. It's not draining away our talent. In fact, it's bringing talent to us. So the more global our research people are, the better it is for the UK. So let's not be parochial about these things. What are we trying to do? Well, we're trying to provide better and more coordinated information, particularly online, particularly to get smaller companies. We're trying to better inform universities of the rapidly changing nature of business. If you're in creative and digital industries, you don't know what's happening around the corner in 5 years' time. You barely know what's happening around the corner in a year's time. And actually, talking to colleagues who are in engineering companies, looking at the kind of processes that they're undergoing, and look inside colleagues in pharma where they're going rapidly into open innovation systems. It's moving at speed. And I think a lot of the feedback we still have is that sometimes universities are moving slower than the speed of business. So we're trying to engage multiple forms of collaboration to help that. It is absolutely right that we should be looking at tailoring solutions to local need. And the Department of Business have asked us to set up a smart specialization advisory hub for the local enterprise partnerships, who will be, after all, managing billions of European funding. And we'll be trying to figure that one out. And we're very fortunate. We're funded by 4 funding councils of England, the Technology Strategy Board and the Research Councils, which means that in our offices, we've actually unusually got them all in the office at the same time. So we can actually work with them, with public funders, to coordinate incentives better. And by doing these, and we've just signed off our strategy with our Leadership Council today, and all the work we'll be doing across the next year, we hope that by the time we create SOR 2015, we'll be celebrating even more success. Thank you.
Intimidated with Alan being responsible for you, David. Alan is here, but of course he's flown the coop, so he can't carry the responsibility. But actually, I think loads of us in this room carry the responsibility for the National Centre for Universities and Business. Those who took time to serve on the transitional board, who now serve on the board itself, those who've taken part, David's here, from the Enhancing Value Task Force. This whole enterprise, despite that video, David, does not depend on David Docherty. It depends on David, on the team who are here in some number, and on those in the sector and in business who are supporting David. It's a great venture, and I'm delighted to be speaking at the launch of this report. David, it is not boring enough for a funding council. It is, I think, an absolutely fascinating report, stuffed full of value. Indeed, possibly the only real criticism I would have is that there's too much in it to digest in one go, and loads to dip into. My speeches for the next year will be illuminated by the case studies from the report, so none of you need to come and hear any of them. I think, as I've been going around for some time talking about the impact agenda and now the National Centre for Universities and Business, when talking to academic audiences, actually not only in this country but abroad, eventually the I word crops up. And they look at me and their sort of lips curl and they say, "You're so instrumental." Well, if this is what being instrumental is about, the contribution that universities working with business make to the economy, I'm proud to be instrumental. And I think earlier, at the close of last year, we had the launch of Elsevier's report on the performance of the UK research base, which showed that, viewed in the most academic of terms, by metrics such as Field-Weighted Citation Index, the UK is #1 in the world. And that by almost any research measure viewed from the academic point of view, we're in the top 2 in the world. We're successful academically, and we're tremendously successful at the contribution we make to the economy and society. Now, that's only down to the efforts of our universities working with their partners in business society. And it's right that we should celebrate that tonight. It's right that we should say it's perfectly possible for the multifaceted organisations that are universities that they can pursue the highest standard of intellectual development, but also understand the needs of society and craft what they do to support that. We must, I think, rebut the idea that there's any single path for universities, any narrowing of what our universities can do for the country and for the world. Universities are complex, multifaceted organisations. Academics don't come in any one class. There are entrepreneurial academics waiting to be unleashed, and this is the story of that. I think, too, we celebrate the contribution that our research-intensive universities make, particularly to that Elsevier report on our worldwide research reputation. It is perfectly clear to me from reading this that we need the work of all 133 higher education institutions in England, 170-odd in the UK. We need the contribution of everyone if our nation is to move forward, supported by its higher education sector. And I'm delighted, David, that you've managed to put a really broad set of examples into this study. Who could not like the idea of taking British beer to China? I thought it was rather good. Who could not like the idea that a bank at Santander, facing the challenges that banks have, should go out of its way to form such a large partnership with many, many universities and to turn that into something that's very real for students and for business. I think that's tremendous. The food industry, I was quite taken with the Nestle example in Sheffield Hallam, which actually we've supported. I think these are wonderful examples of universities focused on delivering for society. I just want to pick out two or three things from this. There is myth-busting. There's not just myth-busting, though, about, I think, what graduates do, although it is good to know, is it 3% of engineering graduates go into the city, which doesn't sound to me as if the city is stripping our best engineering talent out at that proportion. There's some very thoughtful work on the role of technology transfer offices or business development managers, knowledge exchange support staff. I think sometimes unnecessarily and unduly criticised by those who want to pursue business university links in a way that's perhaps not quite so rigorous. I think this report draws out some of their value. I think there's a fascinating analysis in page 44 by Rosa and by Adrian Day from my outfit on trend growth in knowledge exchange, which I hope will inform us about how universities can make choices inform universities and how they make choices about how they work in their relationships with business. I think there is a bit of NCUB blowing its own trumpet. I have lost a bet with myself. I expected the Prime Minister's question reference to have been trotted out by now, Docherty. How on earth did he manage to get a reference last week in PMQ to the great work in which they're doing in Talent Mark 2030 and their target for increasing the number of women engaged in STEM activities? Absolutely fantastic stuff. So I don't know quite what to say about next year. I think you have drawn out the fact that the UK is an outlier. Far, far more of our research happens in universities than in most other countries, and really a lot of the innovation is deeply embedded in universities. And we've seen our colleagues in TSB find that catapults working with universities is key to their success. So next year, David, I think we do need to have a few more boring statistics because we do need the evidence to build our spending review case, but I think we need the case studies as well. I'm delighted to be here to celebrate with you all that you collectively in this room have achieved. To be blunt, I'm proud to have helped a little bit in taking it forward, but the people who deserve the credit are in this room, and it's been my joy to work with them. Congratulations to you all. Thanks.
As a guru, I may do something boring like show some statistics, but what I want to do first of all is say how pleased I am to be able to be here at this event, because one of the things I've learned in the past couple of years through working with David and David Ayton on the Enhancing Value project is the great value there is to be had from following a project through over a period of a year and a bit, in which you integrate very carefully both with universities and with businesses, and that produced the Enhancing Value report, which David's referred to. And it's why I'm very pleased to be able to continue working with NCUB. And I'm not going to say too much about the details of the report. I was asked if I could speak about 2 or 3 things which I think are important going forward. And so what I want to do is pick up 4 things. What I want to do is talk about what we can say on the evidence we have now about what are the really important things that we should think about in going forward in the next year. What are the real challenges that we face? And it's an exciting time to do it because over the past 5 to 10 years in the UK and in other countries, there's been an explosion of research on the nature of university-industry links, on the ways of thinking about innovation as a system and what this implies about how we might think of universities. There's an even longer set of research findings which relate to smaller businesses, which have some very sobering implications for policy, and I'll say a little bit about that. That's universities and the hunting of the snark. And then finally, I just want to say something about a result which we obtained in looking at some of the data, which I found really fascinating, and which I hope you might find interesting too, which is in the report, about the role of immigrants in relation to patenting and invention in the UK, and how that plays out when you compare firms with universities. So the first point is, in discussing what the role of the NCUB might be and what the role of universities might be, it's essential to remember about innovation being a distributed process. The process by which new products emerge or new processes develop is immensely distributed across different people and different organizations. And in picking out universities as a particularly important facet of any economy, you have to see it in terms of the whole set of relationships which govern the innovation process. Because by doing that, you keep a sense of proportion. You also manage expectations about what can be expected from a policy which focuses on universities. So one kind of statistic which illustrates this is to look at what businesses say they do in the way of cooperative activities when they connect with other organizations in the system. And this is evidence from the UK, but you can find almost identical evidence from Australia, the US. Any time a survey of this kind is done, when businesses are asked who they cooperate with in order to carry out their innovations, you'll find that mostly they do it with clients and customers, with the suppliers of equipment and materials, and with other businesses. In other words, there's a tremendous degree of connectivity inside the business community itself, and that relationships with universities, say about 20% of businesses in the UK report collaboration with universities. Those collaborations may be extremely important, are extremely important to the firms concerned with them, but they take place within a much wider system. And when you look at this kind of data more closely, you find that there are multiple interactions for each business. So those businesses that say they interact with universities are almost always also interacting with other businesses and customers. Now, this has quite important implications for the way you think about industrial policy and science policy, and in particular for the role of intermediaries, which David mentioned. Because the balance between these different patterns of collaboration we know varies across sectors, and therefore in thinking about the way in which you can integrate universities best into a system of innovation means you need a fairly granular approach, sector-specific approach, and you also need to bear in mind that the innovation relationships you find with universities are only going to be one part of the story. And that has a very important implication for what the government can expect if it puts more money into funding universities. Because it can expect to get a lot out of it if and only if the other partners in the system are also playing alongside, and in particular, if they invest alongside the science base in taking the whole endeavour forward. So if we go back 10 years to the 2004 Science and Investment Framework, a very important policy announcement to commit governments to increasing the spend on the science base, at least in line with the growth of GDP, by and large, governments met that commitment, but it was not matched by a parallel commitment of business sector R&D. So an overall target of, say, 2.5% of GDP being spent on R&D was missed, largely because the science-based investment wasn't matched by, for whatever reason, by complementary investment in the science base. So you have to think about both sides, private and public sector investment, in thinking about getting value from the system. So that's the first point. Think about universities as part of an innovation system. The second thing is a point, again, which David alluded to in the film and in his talk, which is that there is a tremendous and right emphasis on the importance of STEM skills in the way in which universities can contribute to the economic and innovation system. But if you ask academics, and also there's a parallel survey we did of businesses, who they interact with, and you look at the interactions by discipline, you find that interactions with the business community and the public sector is very widespread across all of the disciplines. This is looking only at interactions with private sector companies, and you do find that STEM academics, these are academics involved in UK institutions in the STEM subjects, are more likely to be collaborating. But if you look at social sciences, it's high. 30% of arts and humanities science academics say they're interacting with the private sector, and nearly 40% of public sector. So this is based on a survey we did of all academics at all institutions across all disciplines in the UK, something like 18,000 responses. It's a very big and good sample. So there's lots of interaction going on across many disciplines. And all of those need to be fostered. Varies across sectors again, varies across technologies, but you have to have a much broader focus than the STEM subjects alone. The next thing I want to talk about was this idea of emphasizing the importance of interrelationship with small firms. And there is a little note in the report which has the heading, Hunting the Snark. And I use that analogy because if you may remember, if you're familiar with the Lewis Carroll story, everybody goes out hunting the snark. It's pursued by a very interesting group of people, including industry bankers. There are bankers in the search party looking for the snark. It has characteristics which are very diverse. They use multiple instruments to pursue the snark. And of course, when they find the snark, somewhere in the distance, one of the intrepid hunters finds the snark, there's a loud scream, and it turns out not to be a snark, but something which is in the poem called a boojum. In other words, it wasn't what they thought they were seeking in the first place. Why is this a useful analogy? Well, it's, I think, a useful analogy when thinking about small firms, because for decades now there's been a pursuit of the 6%. If only we could identify the 6% of super growers, the gazelles, whatever analogy you want to use, this would be a terrific solution to supporting the small business sector. And this is one of the most disappointing things from the point of view of being a social scientist, that for probably 100 years it's been known that the growth processes of small firms are just like a random process. So if I was to pick a sample of small firms now, I'd bet everybody if I said the growth rate next year will be just as if each firm chose a growth rate at random from a hat. And then next year, if they all dipped into the hat again, there'd be another random selection of growth rates. And that's pretty much what the growth rate patterns of small firms looks like. Now, it has some surprising results. One of them is that if you have a process like that, you end up with a few firms having a run of luck, and they end up as the corporate giants 50 years hence. And that's precisely what the data looks like. Now, the reason why this is a sobering piece of evidence, first of all, it's constantly rediscovered. But when it's rediscovered in the form of saying, gosh, did you know the 6% of the firms accounted for 80% of the growth in employment in the last period? And you say, well, yes, we did know that. We knew it the last time this work was done. And then say, yeah, but it's great. It means we can do something with the 6%. And then you have to say, yes. But the evidence also shows that the 6% next year is not going to be the 6% this year. So this is the snark-like process of tracking fast-growing small firms. Now, What does this mean in terms of policy? Well, first of all, it means it's extremely sobering for a policymaker if you say we're going to target the 6%, because they're extremely elusive, they'll change. The positive thing about it is that it implies that if you think about small firms as part of a sectoral distribution of firms, you can think much more about what role small firms in general play in a system. And you think much more about it from the point of view of, say, industrial policy. In other words, stop thinking about, do we want to focus on small firms or do we want to focus on large firms? What we want to think about is, let's devise what kind of policy would support an efficient system of interacting large and small firms. So I think that's a really important challenge from the point of view of thinking forward about what the role of universities might be in relation to small firms. Of course, you can offer lots of services to small firms in general, but once you begin to target this elusive group of super growers, I think there are very serious issues involved. That's a major challenge, I think, for the small firms agenda for NCUB going forward. The next thing I wanted to say something about was to use the slide that David showed a little earlier, to emphasize that in thinking about the connections in an innovation system, or in general the role that universities play, you have always to think about a multiplicity of pathways. And in the survey we did of all academics, this came through in spades. I mean, there's just massive evidence of all kinds of interactions beyond strictly hardline commercialization activities like patenting and licensing. This chart that I'm going to show now is based on a parallel survey we did of over 2,500 UK businesses of all sizes, and what appears is an equally potent picture of different kinds of collaboration. So this shows the proportion of businesses who say they were involved in what we call people-based activities with UK higher education institutions. So you find a very high degree of involvement in training, networking. In each case, the larger bubble is the percentage of large firms who say they were involved, and the smaller bubble is more micro firms, firms employing, say, less than 50 people, and the others are more than 250 people, I think. So two things. The first is that massive involvement in people-based activity, and smaller firms are less likely to report this kind of interaction than larger firms. Of course, there are many, many more smaller firms than there are larger firms, so the numbers involved are quite big. But nonetheless, they're less likely to be involved. The second is problem-solving activities. This has a very long history and goes right back to the roots of many of the great municipal universities of the 19th century, Manchester and so on, where you had very close involvement with the local business communities. That still persists. Problem-solving activities are a very important kind of engagement between universities and the private sector. And finally, there are a wide range of community-based activities. These are increasingly important in relationship to the value of place as an attractor of businesses. To the extent that universities are involved with the putting on of community activities, museums, exhibitions, all kinds of things, that also is likely to lead to valuable potential wealth creation. So a very big diversity of pathways. Some universities will specialize in some more than in others. The one thing that I haven't put on this chart is patenting, licensing, and spin-outs. And that's deliberate. They're mentioned in the report, but typically, UK businesses citing different pathways, the percentages are between 5 and 10% for spin-outs and licensing. So it's important, but it's not as frequent as many of these other activities. So it's very important to think about the breadth of these pathways. And then to end, one piece of evidence which I found was very interesting when, with my co-author Alberto Mogolon, who's here tonight, we were looking at patenting. One of the things about this patenting report here is that it was much longer, and we will publish the director's cut, which has many, many more boring statistics in it. But this one was left in the expert editing. And the reason I want to show it now is twofold. First of all, if you'd looked at a chart of this kind, say, 20 years ago, which is these are the top 10 patenting organizations in the UK, as reported in the World IPO tables. The first thing is there are significant university organisational patenting activities shown in this chart. So Imperial Innovations are there, ISIS Innovations, and Cambridge University. So we have 3 universities amongst the top 10 patenting organisations. The second point is this final column here. It's possible with this particular database to know where the inventor who's cited on the patent application was born. So that enables you to say something about the immigrant characteristics of the inventors named on the patents. And what struck us as very interesting was that if you look at the universities, Imperial, ISIS, and Cambridge, they have much the highest proportion of immigrant inventors. Now, this, I think, is really quite an interesting statistic. It shows the degree to which the UK science base is attracting immigrant scientists who are recruited to the excellence of our science base, who end up being cited in these patenting activities of our largest organisations. Now, the fact that this proportion is higher than it is for businesses is by itself not a particularly interesting statistic once you realise that these big international organisations here are able to locate their R&D and patenting activities in multiple countries. So they can tap into overseas talent and overseas inventive activity without necessarily the individuals coming to the UK. But nonetheless, I think this is a very interesting example of how looking carefully at data about the nature of university activity can reveal another important facet of the value investing in the science base. So on that point, I'll stop, and I wish NCUB every success in producing next year's report.
Panel discussion with Julia King, who is the Vice Chancellor of Aston University, Malcolm Skingle, who's Director of Academic Liaison at GSK, and Anne Morrison, who runs the BBC Academy and has been a very distinguished programme maker. So I'm going to pass to Aaron Porter, who's our Director of External Affairs, to manage that and the Q&A.
A week or so ago, I did ask each of our 3 speakers whether they'd really offer 2 key thoughts. The first is the extent to which their different organisations engage in the development of talent and what they do in relation to that, but also more generally how they, whether they're a university, how they engage with businesses, and the same, the reverse. So if it's all right, I'll go to Anne first to offer some reflections, and when we've heard from each of the 3 speakers, we've then got 4 questions which we would invite the tables to consider. But over to you, Anne.
Okay, thanks very much. And it's a real pleasure to be here. So I run the BBC Academy, which is really training within the BBC. But I suppose what's peculiar about our academy is that we train not just BBC staff, but the wider industry in broadcasting as well. We're also the leader in new talent entry schemes, and we have about 350 people joining us as of next year who will be coming either in as graduates or as apprentices. And so this is by far the biggest formal entry scheme into broadcasting. So it's absolutely vital to us that we engage with universities. I must say I do get quite impatient with employers who criticise some of the graduates, coming out of universities, but don't bother to engage themselves to try and improve things. And you hear it a lot about media studies graduates in our industry. So I've always felt it was important that we engage, that we talk about employability, that we talk about the skills that we need for the future. And also we're involved in some very innovative and interesting partnerships with universities. And what's interesting is actually the money flows both ways. So we deliver some modules, intermediate courses for Greenwich and De Montfort universities, but also we work with a range of universities because they have accreditation, and accreditation, I think, is increasingly important for employers. It's a real talent attractor. So we are the destination of choice, happily for us, for a lot of media graduates. But in technology, we just have to fight that bit harder. We've got an aging workforce in technology, and we decided a couple of years ago that we needed and wanted to bring in a new talent, a younger talent into this area. So we have set up and launched a technology apprenticeship scheme. And so this means that rather than going to university, paying £9,000 a year, these people who've got good A-levels, good maths A-levels in particular, can come to us. We pay them. They spend 3 years with us. They do a higher level apprenticeship, and they end up at the end of it with a B.Eng. So they've actually got their degree through 3 years with us in the workplace. And our main delivery partners are Salford with this, but also Birmingham City and Brunel. And it's a really interesting partnership which we're really hoping to develop and grow. And we also, for our technology trainees, they can go on and get an MSc, and there's also build your own MSc that we do across the workplace. So lots of interesting ways in which we can work with universities. And we talk quite a lot. We do a lot of visiting of universities, guest lectures in universities, talking about employability skills. One bit I loved in the report was Cardinal Newman in the mid-19th century talking about the kinds of skills that you needed as a graduate then. And actually looking at them, they're not so different. It's really interesting. But they are those things which we've heard before tonight about, collaboration, about being not afraid of technology. Any specific technology in a business which is changing as fast as ours is going to date. But that confidence with technology in general, above all, this fusion between creative skills and technology, not dividing kids one way or the other early on in their lives, but actually looking for interdisciplinary working, which means that they're going to come out with confidence in technology as well as editorial and creative skills, because we feel those are the skills we're going to need for the future, and plus a bit of entrepreneurialism. And it was very interesting, and you've seen a bit about the Brighton Hughes report, which I chaired the advisory board for that, and being able to see how these firms in Brighton, which had these, fusion of those skills, were really motoring ahead and really growing. So it seems to me that blend of skills is incredibly useful for the private sector as well as public sector like ourselves.
Great, thanks very much, Anne. If I ask Dame Julia King, Vice-Chancellor of Aston, to offer a perspective from her institution.
Thank you very much. Well, can I first of all start by saying I really do welcome the report. I think it's a great piece of advertising promotion for things we can be really proud of, and I think it will have a huge benefit in terms of, why would you bring your company to Britain? Well, actually, because there's all this stuff you can immediately engage in, and it tells you that there are lots and lots of organisations that will want to understand your skills needs and to contribute them to them in many innovative ways, as we've just heard from the BBC. So at Aston, we're very focused on two things. We're very focused on employability, and we're very focused on enterprise, on stimulating enterprise to create employment. And we sum that up in our very boring strapline, which is employable graduates, exploitable research. And we were very proud when the Sunday Times said, this is a university that does what it says on the tin. Yep, that's what we want you to know that we do. And that's meant we've seen an enormous amount of change in the last 5 years. We've started a school, because that was another way of delivering graduates with really relevant skills. So we have a university technical college. It's been developed with aerospace, automotive, the water industry, the power industry, all contributing to the curriculum and indeed contributing to the teaching. And it takes 14 to 19-year-olds, and it takes them into apprenticeships, and it takes them into A-levels and university entry. We have 2 years of students so far. All is going well, and gosh, it's a really motivating and exciting place to go. And many of our university students are enjoying volunteering at the Aston University Engineering Academy as well, as also and drooling over the fabulous kit that the school kids have got to play with, which in some cases is slightly better than some of the things our undergraduates get to play with in their in their first year. But more and more, of course, we're able to share these things. We've started an employment agency. It's a very special employment agency. It's an employment agency that puts graduates into small companies in the region, and it uses ERDF funding to do that. So that pays 50% of the costs. So this is a way of small companies who might never have thought of employing a graduate to take one and have the risk taken out of that. It's also a way to get unemployed graduates in the region, and they don't have to be Aston graduates, they just have to be in the region. It's also a way of getting them to think about how exciting a career in a small company might be, because they've probably been rather overwhelmed by the fabulous recruitment publicity that big companies do so incredibly well, and they've probably not thought of how interesting life in a very small company might be. And that it had an anniversary celebration earlier this year, and I was delighted to hear of one of our young IT companies in the region who said, we always come to Graduate Advantage, as this agency is called, for our employees. We don't have an HR department, of course. If we need a new employee, we ring up, we say, this is roughly what we want, and Graduate Advantage sends us 3 or 4 people to choose from. All of our staff have come through the employment agency that you run. And again, they're not all Aston graduates, but I'm glad to say some of them are. But it addresses graduate unemployment in the region, and it addresses small business growth, so providing small businesses with something they might find rather hard to do for themselves. Our business school has just been through its assessment to become a provider of government loans to small business. We hope we've got through it. We won't know for a while. But gosh, we're going to be some kind of banker. Actually, we've also just launched our first crowdfunding platform, which is for our student entrepreneurial businesses to get funding to take them to the next stage. We're also part of the region's smart specialisation agenda. We are just completing an £18 million investment in a pilot-scale plant for waste-to-energy through pyrolysis and gasification. This is going to power one of the buildings on the campus. It's been 50% funded by ERDF as part of the smart specialisation for our region. And of course, there's been a huge programme of engaging with local companies in and around Birmingham and the West Midlands to show them what role these local manufacturers could have in the bioenergy industry of the future. So gosh, 5 years ago, I don't think we knew we'd be doing all of those exciting things, and we're really enjoying them. But actually, I have a real soft spot for NCUB for 2 reasons. One of them, it recognises how important placements are. And placements have been our core business at Aston for the last 50 years. 70% of my undergraduates go out on placement. They spend a year in professional training or in a business as part of their degree course, as an accredited part of their degree course. We've got about 20 years worth of research that shows the difference that makes. We know that 40+% of them are offered jobs by their placement companies, and about half of them accept. But what we also know is that we deliver employability better than Oxbridge, and that's starting with bright students, but students who are 40% from the lowest socioeconomic groups, who are 95% from state schools, many kids who've had some pretty uninspiring initial education. That's pretty impressive. But we also know that all of our students, wherever they went to school, however good their A-levels or other entry grades were, all of them get a better degree result than students with the same background and achievement who didn't take a placement. And most importantly, I think, we know that the lower achievers amongst our students, they're all bright, but the ones that gain more from a placement than the highest achievers. So we know just how important those placements are in helping our young people get really good and exciting jobs. And of course, it's an exciting opportunity for some of them to learn what life in a small business might be. And Graduate Advantage, our employment agency, also works to support small businesses to take placement students. I think there's probably just one more thing I'd like to mention. I'd like to mention the wide range of degrees we now find ourselves doing. It used to be students came to us, they did a 4-year degree with a placement, and they graduated, and we helped them into a job. Now, of course, we have foundation degrees, a very successful, a very large foundation degree in power engineering with E.ON and Scottish and Southern and National Grid, delivered right across the country, but with a lot of it delivered in Scotland with the support of local colleges, and lots of men in kilts who come and graduate in Birmingham in the summer, having never been to see us before, but just so passionate about the fact that they've had this access to a degree with their employer that they want to come and market. We've just launched this month a new degree with Capgemini. Capgemini have suddenly discovered they'd recruited more computer scientists from Aston than any other university. So we now have a degree with Capgemini that takes their higher apprentices onto computer science and computer systems management degrees delivered in the company, accrediting some of the training that Capgemini themselves provide, but also with some time spent on the campus getting to know their colleagues and the people who are teaching them from the university as well. So that's going to be 100 students a year, and hopefully Capgemini expect their suppliers and their collaborators to participate and increase the numbers even further. So I think a really exciting picture of lots of new things. I think sometimes actually becoming a bit too complex a picture, and I think some simplification of the landscape. Do we really need foundation degrees and higher apprenticeships? Can't we make life a bit easier for people and have a single set of more glamorous titles for this jolly hard work that these people and their companies are achieving? But I think an exciting picture that really is opening opportunity to a much wider range of people at a much wider range of stages in their careers. And I think that's exciting and important and will help drive the UK economy. And I'll just end by saying the one other thing I really like about the NCUB is that actually it's changed the debate from being about skills, which to me are things that machines can do, to being about talent, which is skills combined with innovation, creativity, and imagination. And it's what the machines aren't going to replace us for. So, thank you.
Fantastic. Thanks very much, Julia. I'm really delighted to introduce the third of our contributors, offering a different perspective again, and that's Dr. Malcolm Skingle, who is the Director of Academic Liaison at GSK.
Thank you. Yeah, so my role is to actually broker the collaborations that we've been hearing a bit about this evening. I've got a small team in Stevenage and in the United States, in RTP in Philadelphia. We put about 530 agreements in place a year, that's globally. But the great thing about doing business in the UK is that you can pick the phone up and talk to people and get things done. And you're not being looked at as a pariah who's manipulating public purse funding, which you do in some countries. So I tap into the academic base at multiple levels. We've just heard about undergraduates. We've got 310 of those on the books this year. Case studentships, BBSRC were telling me that we've got more students than any one single university, including Oxbridge and Imperial. So we currently got 240 case students on the books. We've got many a visiting fellow from universities. We have Royal Society fellowships. And I think anything which increases the level of Brownian motion and increases the number of consenting adults we have on either side of the interface, I think has to be a good thing, because often people will come in and they'll see problems that we have that actually we haven't got time to sort out. They'll take them back to the academic base and they'll start working onto them. In the last 6 months, I've done 5 academic visiting chair agreements where our senior scientists are looking to put something back and also perhaps change the culture in some universities. And they'll spend anything between 20 and 90% of their time over the next couple of years either undertaking some research to help drive that research group in academe to actually perhaps bring skills that they haven't got, and also to influence curricula And in a couple of those cases out of the 5, to actually try and change the culture in the universities, because we get it about different disciplines having to work together to drive science forward. But actually there's still some university departments who still don't quite get it, and they're still quite parochial. So we're going to try and do something about that. I wanted to mention our doctoral training centre in chemistry, because that was a bit of a shot across the bows for a few institutions. We actually set up our own doctoral training centre 3 years ago. It's accredited by Strathclyde University, where we have an excellent relationship in chemistry. We take on 8 students a year, all on our own funding, no public purse funding. And every single one of those students has a first. Many of them turn down a place in a doctoral training centre in one of the larger universities, because the students are pretty savvy. They know that they're going to get a great training when they come to GSK. They know they're going to be amongst world-leading scientists. They know that they're going to have an academic and an industrial supervisor which is going to shepherd them through. So they spend 3 years at GSK working on a portfolio of projects which are all industry relevant, of all value to us. But they also spend 6 months up in Strathclyde getting the other strings to the bow that they require. Now at Strathclyde we have the opposite case. We have 4 students a year who are co-funded with EPSRC, so they are case. They spend 3 years in Strathclyde and 6 months with us. And we also, to increase on the critical mass, we have our own people who are perhaps at the stage of their career where they actually want some CPD, and we have a master's level program, and some of them then also go on to do PhDs. So this is our way of getting to a cohort of 50 to 60 fit-for-purpose chemists in 5, 6, 7 years' time. And those students know that actually, even if we don't employ them, they will get jobs elsewhere because they'll have GSK and Strathclyde on their CV. Now this bit today is all about skills, and I put my hand up. I've always shied from skills because for as long as I can remember, we've never had enough of the sorts of people that we require. Or so it's been said. It's always been better in our day where the students were better, which obviously can't be true because the kids work so hard nowadays. But the truth of the matter is that the government are fed up with employers saying they can't get enough of this or that. And they're actually putting the skills agenda in the hands of the employers through these science industry partnerships, which some of you have probably heard of. So as there's serious money and there's serious commitment from government, for the first time I put my hand up to enter this arena, and I'm going to chair the Life Sciences Science Industry Partnership. We went in large because we think to be transformational we need a lot of money, and although BIS have changed the rules through UKCS a couple of times, we're sticking on in there, and we're actually negotiating at the moment. We've had a couple of meetings. We're in for 32.6 million. We are going to be adding to that from the industry part. It's not in kind, we're putting in real cash. And we will be transformational in our sector because actually our supply chain is not that joined up, unlike automotives or some of the other sectors. Under this will be pharma, biotech, industrial biotechnology, medtech devices, some materials, science of relevance to us. And it's completely in the hands of the employers. So many people have said, can we come and join the board? I've said, unless you're an employer, you cannot. We've had 4 meetings to date. We haven't even got the money yet. There have never been less than 29 people there sitting around the table, and these are all the right level sort of people, which also says to me there must be a real need because people don't put their time and their money into stuff unless there's a real need. So it's going to cover apprenticeships. It's going to go through to degree level and then modular level master's training. My whole thing, if it's to chair this, I want to make it as open as possible. So I won't allow the non-employers to sit on the board, but there's a whole load of stakeholder groups, apprenticeship groups, people working with the sector skills councils and also the deliverers. The other thing that I learned when I got into this about a year ago was how much money there is washing around in this area, and also how poor some of the providers are, and how there doesn't seem any recourse to action that switch them off. If it was a business, actually we'd switch it off like that, and I think now we're going to do that because the people who are going to be running the contracting group are the chair and the sub-chair are both from industry. We will be doing it through the Sector Skills Council, Cogent. They are our secretariat. We are not their puppet. Okay, so we are working with them, and Joanna Wolf has everything I've asked for, she's delivered on. And my job, of course, is working with the universities globally. I'm very Mr. UK-centric. Anybody who knows me knows that I'm passionate about the UK science base. I think the impact agenda and the pathways to impact agenda for the research councils has done more to change culture in a relatively short time, not just because Sweeny's sitting in the front row. I think it's I've had people phone me who would never have dreamt of phoning me 4 or 5 years ago because they actually want to engage. And do you know what? Once they have engaged, they realise the non-financial elements, the value that we actually bring to those partnerships. That can only be a good thing. So I'm very optimistic. I wish NCUB every success in the future. I'm proud to work for, I see Sue sitting at the back there. I work for Praxis Unico. I've been chairing the ABPI Academic Liaison Group this morning. A couple of them were saying nice things about Praxis Unico. I mentioned that I was going to the NCUB deal, and several of them said, what's NCUB? So there's clearly a bit to be done in promotion of NCUB. Now you know what you're going to be doing. But I think we've got healthy times ahead. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Malcolm. And I would just suggest that what we've just heard is is further proof, if ever we needed it. Can you hear at the back? Yeah. That we still have, and we have very much a dynamic and vibrant system of university business collaboration. And in some respects, although time is a necessary limitation, we've heard 3 examples of where it's being done fantastically. There are another 30 or more in this report, but actually that is still a snapshot of what is going on up and down the United Kingdom. And I think that we have a lot to be very proud of. And this is what we think is a contribution to help catalyse that and provide a platform to articulate that. But there is yet more that can still be done. And we look forward to working with everyone over the months and years ahead to take that forward.
What we've had in this last session, we've had aggregators, we've had engagers, and we've had collaborators. Actually, collaborators, I used to think was rather a rude word, but now, of course, it's not. It's what we should all be doing. And I thought that that last exercise showed that so well. A great mix on each table, an interchange of experience and ideas, and in the time available, thank you all very much for what turned out to be a very rich discussion. Thank you for the speakers and to the panel in particular. For their insights in this last session. And so from this microcosm of collaboration, NCUB will seek to build the state of the relationship in the next 12 months, and also to, going back to the earlier session we had as Leadership Council, absolutely to fulfill the terms of our strategy and our remit. So thank you all very much. Don't go away. Please go next door into the Brunel room. A glass of wine or 2 awaits you and some canapes. Thank you.